Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're at in the world today. I want to thank you for attending How SD-WAN Can Improve Unified Communications, today's webinar. Before we dive into the presentations, there's a couple of small housekeeping items I just want to cover. If you have a question at any time during this webinar, please submit it using the Ask a Question button, which is located on the top left-hand side of the player. Your question will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end of today's session. There are additional resources for you to check out in the Attachments tab, which is located at the top of the player. We've also uploaded a copy of today's presentation in a PDF format for you to view offline. You can download these at any time. At the end of today's webinar, please take a moment to actually rate this presentation and provide us some feedback by clicking on the Rate This button on the right-hand side of your player. And finally, a recording of this presentation will be available, and you can utilize the same URL immediately following today's conclusion. So feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues, and utilize the social buttons which are located on your console. And so I'd like to kick this webinar off today. My name is Robert McBride. I'm the Director of Enterprise and Telco Solutions over here at Versa Networks. And I'm happy here to have Alex Fain, who's the CEO and co-founder of SNET Communications. Alex, say hello today.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here.
So, Alex and I are going to cover how SD-WAN can improve unified communications. And to do that, I want to go through and just quickly let you know a broad agenda of the topics that we want to cover with all of you today in our audience. So we're going to kick it off, and I'm going to have Alex, we had SNET Communications on the previous webinar session, but I want to have him reintroduce who SNET is and give some highlights and introduce themselves one more time. I'm going to cover how legacy WAN is impactful to unified communication services, and then we're going to go through how and what you need to do or think about with respect to improving UC, what are some best practices, an example of a customer, and then we're going to cover some Versa specifics related to what some of the things that Versa can bring to the table from a solution angle, and then we'll open it up for Q&A today. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex and have him kick this off.
Good morning, everybody. Again, thanks for having me here. Well, let's talk about ASNet Communications for a second. ASNet Communications is a boutique cloud solution provider. We established our business over a little 10 years ago. And at that point, myself and my comrade Eugene, we worked at these large telecommunication companies, McDonald's and Pepsi of America, and we were surprised to see that telecommunication providers really don't care about providing service. All they care about is when contract starts and when contracts are over. So we saw a huge need on the market for telecom companies that provide real service, quality, and support to their customer delivery. And to this day, that remains one of the main missions of ASNET, is to provide great customer service and great customer experience. Currently, we delivered over 35,000 phones to our clients and over 300 Versa SD-WAN deployments. We focus on cloud-based phone systems, SD-WAN, cloud contact centers, and managed network infrastructures. We have a vast experience in hybrid voice and data networks, and we're very well positioned to assist our clients in VoIP deployments both on-premise and cloud-based. Back to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. So what I'm going to do here is I want to cover, why the legacy WAN. And when I say legacy WAN, I'm really referring to things like the status quo, traditional architectures. As we take a look at this basic diagram, of course, we have a branch office. We have a private line connection. Here in this case, MPLS going into a headquarters data center. But the main point to walk away from this is that there's centralized internet access that's done through a primary site, in this case, HQ or a DC. And so what's actually happening as we look at what's moving on forward from a today perspective, no surprise to anybody, we're doing a lot of different things, right? We've got more apps, there's different types of requirements that are a little bit more bandwidth intensive, they're more real time, so think like O365. If this is like a branch store, think of things like POS systems that might be utilizing a cloud service. Today's topic of conversation, of course, of unified communications, a lot of those kind of productivity applications are, can be hosted on premise, but, actually might be hosted in a different way. And so a lot of these new services and how our users and the workforce are actually trying to move forward and drive productivity or revenue, these are all being served by cloud services. And these cloud services in a traditional architecture then end up competing for the available bandwidth through the centralized internet connectivity through the data center, which ultimately translates into not enough bandwidth for each individual branch, which then translates into the users complaining as a result of dropped calls, pixelated video conferencing calls, inability to connect, other applications being impacted as well, like O365 not being able to sync OneDrive and things of that nature, or Skype just not being able to be reliable. Okay. Main message here to walk away was that the traditional architecture just doesn't help to ensure real-time applications like UC get the quality and assurance that they need. So as we look forward, obviously the next question to ask is, how do you fix this? Well, there's a lot of different options. I don't want to go into exact detail to all of these because I think that the answer we're going to provide is fairly obvious, it being software-defined WAN. But there are a variety of different ways and mechanisms to kind of address a need for additional bandwidth, methods of prioritization, and things of that nature. Solutions 1 through 3, if you look at this, the main takeaway for everyone is these are not really application-driven architectures or branch and WAN infrastructure. These can be hybrid WAN, only MPLS, all broadband, but the magic of application intelligence driven inside of that infrastructure is lacking. Obviously, SD-WAN brings that and provides dynamic security, application SLAs, as well as policies, which actually are used to actually help improve our situation. And so when we look at it holistically from an SD-WAN perspective, what is it with an SD-WAN as we move toward a different conversation, further in the presentation today about unified communications? What is it that actually helps ensure services like UC get the assurance, quality, and reliability they need? Well, you have agnostic transport, so you're able to increase the available bandwidth across the entire enterprise estate. You have dynamic path selection and optimization by looking at what the apps are, assigning them to the various different types of transports and quality of the transports in order to ensure they get end-to-end delivery. Secure access, multi-services over at the edge site and things. And obviously, of course, simplified management at a very top level, very quick view into things that SD-WAN can deliver more than today's traditional WAN architectures. Apologize, excuse me. So with that, I talked a little bit about the problem, talked about methods of fixing it. The answer, of course, is, in our minds here is SD-WAN being able to deliver. We talked at a very high level of some of the core attributes of SD-WAN that are beneficial. I encourage others to look at some previous webinars we have for more info. But with that, I want to flip it back over to Alex and have him really start looking at it from his point of view as a managed service offerer, and where SD-WAN plus unified communications, delivers value.
Thank you, Rob. Well, main benefits of SD-WAN for unified communications. Why is that important? Let's talk about that for a second. Let's say you're sitting in front of a computer, you open your browser, you go into your Salesforce, and it downloads that web page 150 milliseconds slower than the day before, and you actually don't notice anything because it's all about human perception. It's how humans consume information, it's how humans absorb information, and that's why having exceptional performance for voice communications is important. Let's look at a different scenario. Let's say you are calling a call center and you're about to purchase a washer dryer. You stay on hold for 2 minutes, you get that call center agent, and quality of the connection that is connecting you to that call center agent suffers 250 milliseconds delay. At that point, you will experience bad quality, you will drop a call, your connection will get disconnected, and that company that's selling that washer dryer will lose $2,000 of revenue. So at the end of the day, bad quality or incorrect configuration of your unified communication and fine-tuning of your network results to loss of revenue, and that's something that companies cannot afford. So By monitoring network conditions and by rerouting the voice traffic over the organization's stronger circuits allows the unified communication to perform exceptionally well, and companies are not losing revenue. That's the most important takeaway from this. As far as Versa Networks, it gives us an ease of management for network infrastructures. We could look, Versa Networks has intelligence to look at things like mouse cores, to look at things like latencies, and reroute traffic around links that have that congestions or have those problems. So ease of management is definitely built into Versa Networks and built into our offering, and it definitely helps assure exceptional quality for UC and unified communications across your network. With our SD-WAN deployment, there's great flexibility. We could deploy our SD-WAN product across any connections. It doesn't matter what kind of link you have. Either you have a T1, broadband connections, fiber, you're in the contract, out of the contract. It doesn't matter. We have a flexibility of layering our SD-WAN technology on top of whatever connection you have and fine-tuning the quality and deliver your perfect unified communication solution for your enterprise, for your call center, for any sort of voice or video communications. Also really important to know that Versa and our solution have a zero-touch deployment. What that means is that we could take a device and we could drop ship that to any location, and we can ask an office manager of a bank branch or a doctor at that little small office that is part of our network to just take the device, plug it in, plug in a few phones together, and here you go, you get your office in the box. It's up and running literally in a few minutes, and that's extremely flexible, and that's something that companies could not do with their MPLS network. Rob, back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you for, you were touching on some of the main benefits as it relates to SD-WAN. So as we continue moving forward in today's presentation, one of the things that we wanted to do was just give our audience an example of how all this magic works, right? So although this is not, obviously looking at direct product and things, I want to give you an example of how does this kind of steering and app ID and conditions happening across the network, and what does it really look like? So let's visualize it for you right now. So what we have here is a business within the continental United States, and within this, hopefully the animations work. So apologies here. So we have traffic flows, different types of traffic flows going across the WAN links. And as we detect congestion across, say, one of the transports, broadband internet in this case, there's a variety of different SLA management policies that end up getting applied to the overall SD-WAN fabric. And what that means is now you're able to start moving traffic that may be more latency sensitive to a different link that is detected to not have that same level of condition. Meaning in this case here, we move things over to, say, MPLS. Obviously the reverse can happen, of course, too as well. You can have, in a lot of traditional cases, voice or video is sent over MPLS just as a result of some inherent SLAs and things like that. But sometimes, obviously there could be brownouts or other issues. And so the SD-WAN intelligence now allows for you to detect that transport failure or a violation of an SLA that you want to have tied to a service, in this case voice and video, and then determining, something's wrong, we need to then move it over to ensure end-to-end quality for our user experience. And so you move it over to a different transport based off of that detection of an SLA violation, move it over to broadband, or vice versa. Hopefully the animation worked for you. In the offline view of the presentation, you can kind of obviously see some of the you won't see the movement, but you'll see the point in the elements that we're trying to get across to you. Main thing is there's application-based steering that's driven across the entire SD-WAN. And then within that, there are detection mechanisms to find out violations as it relates to the underlying transport and how that then relates to the condition of an application or a service, whether it's business class voice or video or even SaaS-based connectivity. And you apply those policies to react or to either be reactive or be proactive to ensure the quality of that application or service is met end-to-end across the entire software-defined WAN. We're going to cover a little bit more detail specifically about things like MOD scoring, FEC, and line conditioning and such as other value. But now I want to flip it back over to Alex, and he's going to kind of cover the differences between cloud as well as on-premises based and the impact to you as it relates to your unified communications.
Thank you, Rob. We support clients that have a cloud-based phone system or on-premise EC deployment. Really, any way you look at it, when you have a unified communication traversing your network, you have to have a network that is fine-tuned for that unified communication. So, for example, if your unified communication setting of the cloud, let's take ASNet, for example, we would have your UC spread amongst 2 of our data centers, and our SD-WAN will be deployed and connected to our data centers, and quality of service, which we'll talk in details later how that operates, will be deployed in that example, and your voice, your video, your call center will get great performance over that network, because the network is fine-tuned for that, because it uses best practices. Now, when you have on-premise deployment, and some of our customers do that, the same challenges arise. You have the same problems. Your network has to be fine-tuned, and it has to know about the things like Rob mentioned before, mouse scores and latencies and jitters and delays and all those things that are important for a great experience with unified communication. So there's no differences between cloud-based EC deployment or on-premise EC deployment from perspective of quality, perspective of network fine-tuning and network configuration to support that protocol. It's all about best practices, and best practices implemented on your network. So, we've all heard this. When I go see new clients, sometimes I sit down with them and I ask, well, you're having a phone system today. That phone system is connected to traditional phone lines. We like to talk about VoIP. And some people have the perception that, well, VoIP doesn't work. There's problems with it. And the reason to that is because best practices were not used for VoIP deployments for many, many years prior, SD-WAN, prior MPLS, and some people have a bad perception on that. So let me give you an example of a best practices deployment. The most important thing to deliver unified communication is quality of service. Using our SD-WAN product, we can enforce those quality of service in all points of our network. And let's talk about this a little bit. I always like examples. So I love this awesome example. When you're in the airport and you're right about to board a plane, you have your first class passengers lines, you have your business class passengers lines, and you have your economy boarding, right? So we've all been there and we all know what that means. The same thing happens with our quality of service. So there's 3 buckets created. Your first class traffic, and it's always been unified communication, your VoIP. That goes into that bucket. Then we have our mission critical applications, maybe things like your databases or whatever the mission critical applications are in that network. And then we have our economy boarding bucket, and that could be Susan shopping for shoes or other non-mission critical traffic. Our SD-WAN technology allows us to send our first class VoIP traffic on our network first. It allows us to reroute along the problematic areas and allows us to deliver our voice traffic with just that first class precedence. And then we have our second bucket from business class that our SD-WAN technology delivers as well. And then after that, the best effort. And that best practices of applying that quality of service and network assures that exceptional quality, so your company doesn't lose money because of the bad unified communication experience on your network. I like to talk about a couple things that are important in best practices. There's things to watch out for, like MOS score. MOS score, look at it as pretty much a score of quality. For voice calls, it's important that your MOS score stays between 3.2 and 5, and that's a great way of monitoring your quality for voice and rerouting the traffic. Versa is launching something new that Rob will discuss with you shortly on how we can use that to reroute the traffic. It's also really important for voice or for video is to have our round trip delay for less than 150 milliseconds. When we go above that, we have all sort of problems on our network, and it's really important that our turnaround traffic is less than 150 milliseconds. With that in mind, I'd like to talk about our managed service. A few things to consider when deploying a EC solution with a managed service provider like ASNet or any others. We, managed service providers, could take on the management of your UC and your SD-WAN solutions, so you don't really have to worry about it. We are flexible. We understand vendor management. We have expertise that are special to unified communication and SD-WAN deployment together. We understand wide area networking. We understand broadband providers. We know how to source this. We know how to connect all that together so that it becomes a great service to your organization, and it's customized to whatever your organization business is. If you're medical offices, if you're doctor practices, if you're selling something, we understand that business and we deploy your SD-WAN together with unified communication. So at the end of the day, you have great service to your company and to your business users. With that in mind, I'd like to talk about one of our recent deployments with a national dentist practice that has 42 locations. First, I'd like to go a little bit into challenges that this company had, and then I'd like to go into solution. So their challenge was that they were struggling with vendor management because they had multiple locations. At all these locations, they have multiple broadband connections, and all these broadband connections were with different vendors, and this company has a really terrible trouble managing all that, supporting that, and operating that. They also have a lack of support on their bandwidth. Their links were going down. Their medical, they use these apps to bring up pictures of people's teeth, and they also use different medical applications that they use at different offices, and they had a big trouble supporting that across their network. It would just not come up, or it was too slow, or the files wouldn't open on time. All that would result to lost revenue because they could see less patients, they could process less patients, they could do less work, they could schedule less appointments, the doctors were not happy. So there was a real bad business challenge. On top of all that, their call center and their PBX didn't really have the tools to support the high volume of patients that they've seen. And they just couldn't get all the patients in the queue all the time. Results to drop calls definitely was a problem. So when we got to this practice, they told us that they needed to fix the situation really fast, and it needs to be deployed, and their investors are unhappy about the performance. So we provided a comprehensive solution for UC and SD-WAN deployment. We've deployed SD-WAN over 42 locations. We've deployed our cloud PBX. We deployed our cloud contact center and next generation firewall over 42 locations, guys, in 30 days. That was amazing. That was something that I'm going to be proud until the end of my days. That was a very big deployment, and we were really happy to use Versa Networks here because that zero-touch provisioning was really important here, and that fast deployment was really important. So this enables us to fine-tune network to our VoIP and our call center solution. Mission-based routing enable us to prioritize voice traffic over their data traffic. We also were able to provide priority for their call center traffic over non-mission critical applications. Their medical files and images. We gave that priority over other traffic, and now their doctors are able to see that and open that fast enough so they could see patients. We improved the reliability over their old solution, deployed multiple connections, and results are there. Customers are able to support 80 agents on the phone, receiving 30,000 calls a day. That's just amazing. Previously, they were at 50% of that. They were maybe getting 15,000 calls a day or less because the infrastructure was not able to support that. The accelerated time to service right now with centralized and zero-touch deployment is really important because this practice buys other practices and they open locations, 1 or 2 locations per month. Now it's not a problem. We literally take an SD-WAN appliance, put it in the box with 3-4 phones and a switch. We order multiple broadband connections, and we drop ship this office in the box to the new location so that office manager of that location just opens it up, takes the switch, plug in the phones, plug in SD-WAN device, plug in 2 internet connections, and here you go, they're in business. They're extremely happy with that accelerated time to service, and that has been a great example on how SD-WAN could fix and fine-tune customer networks, nationwide practice like that, and deploy UC at national level. Rob, back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. So Alex talked, quite a bit and gave some details with respect to things to think about from a practices perspective. Obviously, the customer example is, incredible. The one stat Alex just kind of stated in regards to, 42 locations in 30 days. I mean, it's incredibly impressive. And SD-WAN helps empower that, right, as a result of the simplicity of and automation built in. One of the things that, I want to touch on now, obviously, of course, is what Versa can bring to the table. But and specifically, it's going to go into a little bit of extra detail around a very specific bullet, if you will, that Alex brought up in his customer example, which is around, prioritizing and kind of looking at the traffic to ensure you know what the traffic is, what is the traffic doing, how is the traffic behaving, what's the experience of that, and to then push it forward. So the elements of what Versa brings to the table here is, one, for customers like SNET Communications and other of our partners, we provide an architectural foundation from our cloud IP platform that actually provides native third-party virtual services support, which means you can virtualize SBC services, virtualize other types of UC components on top of a standardized compute platform that you can deploy within your hosted environment or have that deployed, of course, downstream into your own end user customers. From a secure SD-WAN perspective, this is actually as a result of our integrated security. So not only can you provide optimized application and services, increased bandwidth, and broader SD-WAN value, but our integrated security that's contextual from app user location as well as device now gives you that extra power and oomph to provide protection for direct internet access. As you heard Alex talk from a lot of the solutions and services that they've provided from an SNET angle, there's a lot of broadband connectivity. And so broadband connectivity implies direct internet, and direct internet needs to be protected. That is an extra attack vector that you need to think about. Now, when it looks to things for UC, right, so we talked about security, right? We talked about potentially hosting of services so you can add some extra value add, whether you're a provider or even as an enterprise that needs to look at different ways of architecting your branch. Now, there's 2 specific things. One thing we call transport line conditioning, and the other is obviously UC-specific traffic steering. Transport line conditioning talks about things like FEC, cloning, and replication, and I'll talk to that here in about a minute or two, a little bit more. But I really want to kind of show you with respect to the things related to UC-specific optimizations, specifically mods, codec, and the reporting thereof. So as we look at this, we look at the Versa Cloud IP platform, which now has unified communications optimizations. And what does that mean? Well, as you see the bullets here, it means that there's embedded codec support as well as mods-based policies, which means that, you look at the mod score of the traffic, or in another element of Versa solutions, we actually develop our own mod scores also too as well. And you use that as a mechanism to determine What is the quality or the perception of quality and experience of this particular service, voice and video, and what should we do with it and ensure that we provide it the utmost quality and give it the best possible score that there can be, 5 in this case as an example, as well as some native Moz reporting. So to visualize this for you, I put together, hopefully again the animation works for you, but you've got a variety of different services, video messaging, voice over IP calls, calls that need to go over to the SBC in order to be routed out to the PSTN potentially. Now, one thing that I hope you walked away with from Alex's side is he mentioned, having a delay of less than 150 milliseconds is critical to ensure top-notch quality of voice traffic. I don't remember off the top of my head right now for like video, if you will, but when you look at metrics associated through most SD-WAN solutions in the market, the metrics are being looked at from a transport perspective. You're looking at latency, jitter, delay, and packet loss. And then you're defining SLA policies based off of those characteristics of the transport, and then assigning applications to look to adhere to the policies, if you will, of the underlying transport. If the transport violates or has extra, increased loss, increased delay or jitter, this impacts an app, move the app over. Now, this is really good for application data services, if you will, right? Like things like Alex was saying, like things like database services or what have you, large file processing, whatnot. But what they don't do, and what we're talking about here, is actually looking at the voice stream or video stream, cracking the codec open, looking inside of the codec, getting the data out of the codec, which is specifically here Moz scoring, and being like, oh, this says Moz is 3 or 4. And then basing your policy off of what you see inside of the actual voice and video stream. To tee off of Alex, about examples, one example is we all use Google Maps and Waze. We understand how that operates to provide an optimized driving experience, right? The best path to get to work, best path to get to a friend's house. And it looks at traffic qualities, right? How congested is a road? How long is it taking for people to get from point A to point B? But what it doesn't do is actually look inside of the car and be like, how are the people feeling? So that's kind of related to what this ability of having embedded codec as well as Moz support in the VersaCloud IP solution is. It allows us to actually open up the car door, look at people's faces, see what the experience is of the person, and then make a decision based off of policy, based off of how we feel that they're doing, right? Is voice good? Is video stream good? And then drive that intelligence across the entire SD-WAN. So as we look forward here, just an extra level of details. I talked about line conditioning. So not in condition with, in addition to being able to crack the nut open, look at Moz data, have policy based off of that Moz data directly in the voice and video stream or flow, then you can take policies like, oh, let's be proactive. When I see a Moz score of 3 or have a trigger of 4, I want to start cloning. For video conferencing calls, if I start noticing the Moz scoring being fluctuating, I want to now start doing forward error correction. I want to start replicating packets across multiple links and striping them as a result of seeing an SLA violation. Or do that proactively so you don't actually have to have that SLA violation actually occur. The point to walk away here is utilizing the actual data within the voice and video stream itself as the identifier and qualifier to what your policy is in conjunction to the SLA metrics associated to the underlying transport, whether it be broadband, Metro Ethernet, MPLS, or even LTE. Combining those two in order to provide the best possible experience as it relates to unified communications, and on top of that, any other kind of application services. But obviously, Moz is very specific to UC. With that, we're coming over to a close to our webinar. Obviously here, you can see that you can get a lot more information. I want to remind everybody that we've provided attachments, provided attachments over to for you to download, and at a glance from SNET and some web links to learn a little bit more information. Alex, we've actually got 2 questions. So the first question I want to ask you here, and they seem to, this one is more your side, is, You were talking about managed services and how managed providers, you see managed providers, give value downstream. But can you just give it a little bit more explanation on how do you actually source your connections and, handle all of the logistics around connectivity for your customers and your managed services?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. This is a very great point. So now, often enough, when I talk to an IT manager of an enterprise, and we discuss, hey, let's migrate off MPLS or augment MPLS with SD-WAN technology, the question then becomes okay, now I have so many broadband connections. They go up and down. The SLAs are different. I have a really hard time. I have a smaller team. I really don't want to worry about ordering broadband connections, managing broadband connections, sourcing broadband connections, store the hardware for my SD-WAN. And it becomes a big problem because me as an IT manager, I have my apps that I need to support. I have users that I need to support, computers, PCs, and all that. So we've built this managed SD-WAN service around the aspect of helping IT guys not to worry about that. It's completely off the table for IT managers with our managed SD-WAN service. So what we do is we source broadband connections, we source MPLS connections, all sort of connections, being DSL, cable, broadband, copper, Ethernet, I mean, you name it. Anything that exists out there, we have relationships with almost every broadband service provider out there. We would source it, we would take care of the billing for our customers, we would take care of the management, and that's the most important. Our NOC will monitor every connection you have in your SD-WAN network, and it will do break and fix, and will proactively monitor and manage and maintain those connections. So that at the end of the day, our customers do not have to worry about that. They just worry about their day-to-day activities and running their IT infrastructure. So that's what we do, Rob, for our clients on our managed SD-WAN service. And anybody who is listening to this presentation right now should deploy their SD-WAN with full management. That helps a lot. Back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Alex. And, there's another question here, and, this one is arguably could probably be for both of us. I think it's more leaning on the Versa side, but, the question is, how do you manage IPsec header impact on voice over IP calls over an SD-WAN overlay? So, one, whoever answered that question, there's a lot of detail likely behind this, and, being on the marketing side, there's some level of technical information that I probably don't know to give it accurately. So reach out to me direct at rob@versa-networks.com, and I'll get you in touch. But in general, part of it comes down to the FlexBNF, which is the edge component or the data plane component of the cloud IP, and the way it's architected and how it manages the packet pipeline, and how we handle looking at as packets come in, stripping and prepending, of course, the headers as it relates to IPsec for the secure aspect of the tunneling. So part of it comes around to efficiency of being able to pop that off so we don't incur as much latency. Obviously, I can see your question is really more around the impact of additional payload, if you will, right, making the packet size larger, and obviously making that impacts end-to-end service delivery on that. The other aspect to this, of course, is there's some other policy aspects related to the Versa solution that allows you to either have it be encrypted or not encrypted. So there are certain types of flows that you can actually have designated so that you don't actually have to utilize, an encrypted tunnel, if you will, right? So we can actually have connectivity that's not encrypted based off of certain policies. Some customers actually need that for certain types of use cases. There's some elements associated to that. But the main part of it really comes down to us architecturally minimizing, as I'll say here on the webinar, minimizing the impact of the extra overhead as a result of our ability to very efficiently decrypt as well as encrypt as it relates to the embedded architecture of sort of to FlexBNF. But to that, reach out to me direct at rob@versa-networks.com. And if there's anything, I can let some of you know here on the webinar some of the answers associated to that. But I want to make sure I get more of an accurate aspect. Alex, if there's something you want to add to that, by all means, feel free to. Yeah. But that is our. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. So I don't know the detailed technical answer to this question, but what I'd like to say is that it definitely gets managed. We have, like I said before, over 300 connections deployed on SD-WAN so far, and every single one of them has a voice application running encrypted inside the payload. So somehow it gets managed, but I couldn't answer how exactly. Thank you.
So with that, we're coming up to a close. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. Reach out to us from a general inquiry. Reach out to us at info@versa-networks.com. You've heard me identify how you can reach to me direct. From Alex's team on the SNET communications side, you can reach out to the email address there. There's some information, learn more about SNET's managed service offering as it relates to SD-WAN as well as UCaaS. And of course, we have some other webinars that relates to the Versa Networks software-defined webinars channel series and things. With that, Alex, I really like to thank you for joining us today and providing some insights that relates to managed services, UC, and your guys' experience in delivering this for your own end user customers. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Rob, I'd like to thank Versa Network for building an awesome product for us to manage our VoIP deployments. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Alex.